So welcome everyone. We are here at the Alliance to End Human Trafficking, today's World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. For those of you who are joining us on the West Coast, I know it's awfully early, so we are very appreciative of you joining us here at this early hour. And for those of on the East Coast, hopefully we're fully awake right now. So July 30th, which is the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, and this year's theme is Leave No Child Behind in the Fight Against Human Trafficking. And according to a new report by the International Labor Organization, forced labor is on the rise. And that's what we're focusing here on today. Forced labor, child labor, and labor trafficking. And according to this report from the ILO, Profits and Poverty, the Economics of Forced Labor, it generates $236 billion a year in annual illegal profits, 37% increase from 2014. So forced labor is a $52 billion a year industry in the Americas alone. Like other forms of human trafficking, it is a crime that hinges upon individuals being compelled against their will to provide service through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. And so I'm very happy and pleased to introduce three of our speakers today. And our first speaker is going to be Sister Brigid Clingman. And Sister Brigid Clingman, raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in a family of 6 siblings by parents deeply involved in social justice ministries and education. She had entered the Dominican Sisters in Grand Rapids in 1960. She received her BA from Aquinas College and the MRE Aquinas Institute of Religious Studies, MSW, Western Michigan University. Her ministries included junior high teacher, social worker in child welfare systems, Catholic social services in the dioceses of Grand Rapids. She also served in parish ministry as director of religious education and a pastoral associate. She also served in criminal justice ministry as a chaplain with the Wayne County Youth and Home and Jail, a director of Team for Justice, Wayne County Commission on Community Corrections, manager of programs of Project START, which is a reentry program for probation and parolees, Michigan Coalition Against the Death Penalty, Catholic Social Services in Wayne County, where she served as Director of Voices, Victim Offender Therapy for Sex Offenses, in-house Director of Shelter for Homeless Adolescent Mothers, and the Board of Directors. Her internal ministry for the Dominican Sisters in Grand Rapids includes the leadership team from 2000 to 2006 and promoter of justice from 2014 to current day. Her human trafficking efforts included Secretary for the Education Committee for the Alliance to End Human Trafficking, Secretary for the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force, and initial involvement in development for the Kent County Task Force and Committee on Labor Trafficking. So if you all can join me in welcoming Sister Brigid, we are very happy to have her here today. The next person I'd like to introduce is Kwami. And Kwami is on our Alliance to End Human Trafficking Survivors Advisory Council. And Kwami has been involved with our organization just recently this past year. He is an anti-trafficking advocate, speaker, and consultant. As a survivor, he understands the tragic impact of human trafficking all around us. His lived experience shaped his career and interests, which led him to advocate for policies that assist victims as they navigate life after being trafficked. Break the Chain was a documentary that featured Kwami. The film shows how human trafficking goes unnoticed in our own backyards. Break the Chain was created to provide a reliable and educational entertainment resource for use in training and community awareness events across the United States. Kwami is currently a board member of Not for Sale, One Step at a Time, an organization that raises awareness and provides hope to communities throughout Ohio, America, and the world. President Trump appointed Kwami to the United States Advisory Council on Human Trafficking on December 22nd, 2020. The Justice for Victim of Trafficking, enacted on May 29th, 2015, established the United States Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, which provides a formal platform for trafficking survivors to advise and make recommendations on federal anti-trafficking policies to the President's Interagency Task Force to monitor and combat traffickings in person. Kwami partners with Blue Campaign, the federal government, NGOs, and service providers as consultants. Kwami was awarded the 2023 Gillen Massey Award tract Lesson from the Trenches. Kwami serves as Advisory Council Ambassador for the Ohio Attorney General's Human Trafficking Commission. His goals are to raise awareness, reduce the risk of male victimization, educate members of the government and the general public, and advocate for victim protection and wellness. Kwami earned a Bachelor of Science in Education from Walsh University. His ultimate goal is to work for the government, rescuing and protecting victims of human traffickers. And he believes that with God's assistance, we will be able to defeat this heinous crime against life. So our next esteemed speaker will be Eileen Dong. So while Sister Brigid will first give us an overview of what human trafficking and labor trafficking looks like, Kwami will be focusing on the domestic violence, domestic trafficking, and then Eileen will be focusing on the international aspects of labor trafficking. And Eileen Dong is an internationally recognized speaker, expert, and consultant in combating human trafficking and gender-based violence. As a UN ambassador and member of the USCRI, TVAT, and Aspire Advisory Board, she has made significant contributions to global efforts to end abuse and exploitation. In addition to her lived experience, which informs her work and amplifies the voice of survivors, Eileen's diverse professional background spanning immigration, law enforcement, and supply chain management brings a unique perspective to this field. She has trained law enforcement executives, provided consultations at roundtables, and collaborated with organizations such as the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Center for Countering Human Trafficking, Homeland Security Investigations, Department of Justice, and Citizenship and Immigration Services, contributing to her insights to combat human trafficking, money laundering, and transnational organized crime. Eileen's dedication is evident in her founding of Hope Picks Global, where she tirelessly works to create safe spaces and sustainability for survivors from all backgrounds. Her efforts have been recognized with prestigious awards, including the Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award and commendations from the U.S. Congress, state governors, and city councils. As an award-winning speaker, lecturer, and author, Eileen has reached millions worldwide through her TED Talk, Things You Don't Know About Human Trafficking, her lecture at Cambridge University, and her book, Thank You, Predator, A Guide to Trauma Recovery from Abuse, and other major media outlets. Eileen has provided consultation to the UN's Declaration of Human Rights by the American Youth to eliminate abuse and exploitation, and participated in the Department of Homeland Security's roundtable, offering consultation to inform approaches to investigating human trafficking and gender-based violent crimes and improving survivor support. Furthermore, Eileen successfully testified in favor of the passage of the Texas Senate Bill 49, resulting in almost tripling the crime victims' compensation from $1,800 to $5,000, and the approval of $1 million for the first trauma recovery center in Texas. Eileen is a prominent Asian American woman who leads in providing inclusive and survivor-centered care and bridging the gap in culturally and linguistically sensitive responses between law enforcement, victim service providers, and culturally specific communities in the U.S. and abroad. Ambassador Eileen is a beacon of hope for survivors, showcasing resilience, empowerment, and driving force in the fight against human trafficking and gender-based violence. So please join me in welcoming all of our esteemed speakers. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Sister Brigid.
Thank you. There we go. First, we're going to start with some basic information on all of human trafficking, which are crimes against humanity. And we're quickly going to go back to Christine to show this video. So go, Christine.
How do you fight the second largest criminal industry in the world? You start with the product, human beings. Human trafficking happens a variety of ways, and it results in a variety of enslaved people. Recruiting someone by force for the purpose of debt bondage is trafficking. Obtaining someone's work by fraud for the purpose of involuntary servitude is trafficking. Those who are trafficked can be found working on farms, in hotels, in restaurants, in homes as caregivers or housekeepers, as street peddlers, and being sold for sex. There are many ways it happens, but the result is the same. An estimated 30 million people are exploited for the gain of others. It's not fair. Human trafficking is a $150 billion global industry, but the groups that fight trafficking have less than 1/10 of that budget. It's not a fair fight. In fact, the only thing fair about human trafficking is that it can happen anywhere and at any time. It happens in all 50 states right here in America. It's truly an equal opportunity atrocity.
Okay. Are we together here?
Yes.
For some reason, I'm screen sharing, but I'm not getting.
We were seeing your screen, but we just lost.
I'm not getting a movement off of it.
Oh,
We were
maybe.
fine a minute ago, weren't we?
Yeah, maybe it froze up. Maybe close out and try to
Yeah,
open it again.
We'll try again. We practiced and we were doing fine. There we go. All right. United States definition of human trafficking. Recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through use of force, fraud, coercion, for the purpose of subjecting to involuntary servitude, peonage, debts, bondage, or slavery. Global index terms to define human trafficking. And again, many of the same: force, fraud, coercion, sexual exploitation, human trafficking, crossing border or within a country, slavery, and slavery-like practices, including forced marriages. Trafficking by the numbers. One thing to remember concerning by the numbers is that there is no absolute indication of numbers. This statement from the Global Modern Slavery Forced Labor indicates 49.6 million people. We just heard in the video 30 million. The International Labor Organization says 160 million. So the range is very great. The difference in the numbers has to do with definitions of what fraud, coercion, all those words mean. They mean different things in different countries. Types of labor trafficking include bonded labor, forced labor, and child labor. Bonded labor or debt bondage is probably the least known, but the most widely used. We have historically called it indentured servitude, where a person pays the employer for the costs of coming into a new country or a new situation. It doesn't work. And the indentured bondage, debt bondage, can often afflict the family for 2 or 3 generations. Industries that are most likely to include labor trafficking are agriculture, construction, factories, manufacturing, domestic work, landscaping, and healthcare. And those most likely to be targeted are foster children, homeless runaway youth, foreign nationals, and individuals living in poverty. Why human trafficking? Greed of traffickers to make more money. Endless supply of desperate labor. Demand of the consumer for cheaper products. This is particularly a problem within our own country, the United States, where we have a high demand for quality products at cheap prices. The consumers of these products are also guilty because they enable trafficking by purchasing these products. There are degrees of abuse of human trafficking, as well as abuses within the labor industry. And so there is a cusp of labor abuse and human trafficking. They overlap one another. So there's the exploitation of workers having low pay. They're compelled to work. They're working in unsafe and unhealthy environments. They're working long hours. They're threatened. They live in poor living conditions. And it all may be legal, depending on the country or state. Slavery is no pay. The individuals are captive. The situation is dangerous and life-threatening. The hours are on demand. There's terrible abuses. It relates high homelessness and is patently illegal. As we've seen before, these are the type of victims that are most likely to be exploited or enslaved. There are various means of controlling people. Force can be physically hurting you, threatening to hurt you, visibly carrying a weapon. Fraud can be lying about working conditions, making false promises, fraudulent contracts. Coercion can be verbally abusive, can be a threat to call ICE or immigration, restricting who you may talk to, and making you believe that if you leave, someone you care about will get hurt. There are red flags by which we can identify abuse and methods of control. Control movement includes such things as not being allowed to leave the premises unless going to work, and often with accompaniment. A crew leader will not let the person go into town, cannot go anyplace because of lack of transportation and unwillingness of the employer to assist. Workers can be controlled by restricting their access to food, no lunch breaks, not allowed to go to a grocery store. The employer provides the food, and the worker has no way of making foods. And the boss can hold back food if they are angry at you. Denied medical care. Can only receive medical care if the crew leader agrees, and who would often accompany so that information given to the medical personnel is impossible. A major medical issue is the use of pesticides on fields for agricultural workers, which has led to childhood abnormalities as well as cancerous situations. Immigration threats, the employers or the crew leaders will take the person's identification, passports, and other legal documents and will not give them back. They threaten to call immigration, and they will call and can also call the police if there are complaints or distractions. And finally, these workers are afraid that their families and friends can be harmed if they do not cooperate. Their families are known to the predators, and also if they try to escape, other workers can be punished. Going now more specifically to child labor. And here the ILO, the International Labor Organization, indicates 160 million children in child labor, 79 million of whom are in hazardous work. International standards define child labor as work that is hazardous to a child's health and development, demands too many hours, and/or is performed by children who are too young, and interferes with the child's right to education and to play. %70 of child labor abuses occur in agriculture, followed by other services that were mentioned earlier, and then by industry. And if you note from the pictures that this is not a new issue, it is an issue that has gone back many centuries. Child labor is more prevalent among boys than girls. Here we have a chart that indicates a percentage of children from the age of 5 through 17 who are engaged in child labor. And consistently you see that the boys do outnumber the girls. There are several areas that impact on our participation. Two of the highlighted ones will be chocolate and electronics. As recently as last month, human rights advocates filed class action against major chocolate companies such as M&M's, Snickers, and Oreos over their failure to end the use of child labor on cocoa plantations in African countries like Ghana and Ivory Coast. The suit was brought by the international rights advocates and accused these candy companies of purposely dragging their feet to phase out child labor, misleading the public about their efforts, and condemning generations of children to die of poverty and dangerous conditions. Dragging their feet is indicated by the fact that these same companies had signed a protocol, the Harkin Engine, in 2001, where they had pledged to end the possibility of child labor within 5 years of signing that protocol. Child labor in cocoa has many dangers. Children are forced to work up to 14 hours a day. They are using hazardous materials or instruments such as chainsaws and machetes, including climbing into the trees to cut the pods with a machete. Another major issue is the carrying of the sacks of pods, which frequently weigh more than 100 pounds. Some of these bags are taller than I am. It took 2 people to put the bag on my head. And if you don't hurry, you are beaten. Many of these children are trafficked to work in these farms. Others are members of the family that own the farms. The International Labor Rights Forum reports that every research study ever conducted shows that there is human trafficking going on. A journalist who visited cocoa farms in Ghana during the making of the documentary Invisible Hands said that he found trafficked children on all the farms they had visited. There is enslavement of both children and adults in the Ivory Coast and Ghana. 23% of the Ghanan workers performed work without compensation. And while the term slavery has a variety of historic context, slavery in the cocoa industry involves the same core human rights violations as other forms of slavery throughout the world. One difficulty of the need for trafficking is that the cocoa farmers can barely survive. The Ivory Coast farmers provide 47% of the world's cocoa beans. The cocoa is difficult to work with. It has a 4-month plant to harvest syndrome cycle. It gets contaminated by pests. It needs a perfect balance of between rainfall and heat. Otherwise, its roots get flooded and rot or simply dry up. The amount of yield has been halved over the last several years. Farmers have indicated that farming requires a lot of physical work and time. We can't afford more manpower, so we, with the boys in the family, do everything ourselves. We have absolutely no say in the price of the fruit we produce. Most children who work on the farms do so within their family structure. This reflects the reality of rural poverty, the scarcity of land, food insecurity, lack of education, lack of access to potable water, poor health services, and the whole range of other issues. The other industry that touches our lives daily is electronics. Any of our computers, phones, and the like contain lithium-ion batteries that may be produced with an input produced with child labor, electric cars, laptops, cell phones. This lithium comes from mines. According to UNICEF, more than 40,000 children work in mines extracting cobalt. Amnesty International indicates that the children handpick cobalt ore without protective gear, receiving lacerations and injuries that lead to a variety of infections. They also inhale the harmful dust, making them prone to lung disorders. And they work long hours. They carry the hand-picked ore on their backs, risking traveling through narrow, collapse-prone, dark tunnels. People are working in subhuman, grinding, degrading conditions, using pickaxes, shovels, scrounging in trenches, pits, and tunnels. Cobalt is toxic to touch and breath. There's indication of young mothers mining the cobalt, having babies strapped to their backs, and both mother and child breathing in the toxic cobalt dust. A few facts about child miners. They're found in all parts of the planet. The children are mostly from economic downtrodden backgrounds, are either uneducated or school dropouts, work in inhumane and dangerous conditions. Mining is considered the worst form of child labor, as the hazardous conditions in mines adversely affect the safety and health of children. One of the facts of child miners working in artesian mines in the Dominican Republic of the Congo is that they contribute to the production of cobalt, coltan, copper, and tin. 40% of the 2 million miners are children. Their pay ranges from 75 cents to $3 a day. They are exploited because of poverty, lack of education and economic opportunities, corruption of the mine owners and the government, lenient law enforcement, and our soaring demand for mined materials. Cobalt mining involves injuries, death, and health hazards. It causes dehydration, respiratory infections, and accidents. Coal mining exposes children to toxic vapors and mercury poisoning. Salt mining exposes children to dizziness, skin problems, and discoloration of the eyes. Stone quarries in Guatemala to mine volcanic river rocks. It takes 3 days for a 13-year-old boy to produce 1 cubic meter of gravel that sells for $7.50. 1 cubic meter is the size of 3 bricks. Children as young as 5 are found collecting and breaking rocks in these mines. Child labor exists in the United States. It has been prohibited since 1938 under the Fair Labor Standards Act, restricting working in most institutions for those under the age of 14, restricting the hours to no more than 3 on a school day until 16 years old, and prohibits hazardous work until child is 18. Child labor violations in the United States has soared in the years 2022 to 23. A letter was written to Tyson Food from several members of the U.S. Senate, including Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, Dianne Feinstein, and Bernie Sanders. And they are writing to Tyson Food regarding the disturbing child labor violations occurring in your meat packing facilities. 2022, the Department of Labor released findings from its investigation showing repeated evidence of child labor exploitation in the JPS cattle slaughter and processing plants and several others owned by that company. A New York University study found strong evidence that labor trafficking ensnares teens and younger children widely, far from being made up of migrants alone, in industries ranging from domestic work to forced criminality, entertainment, and agriculture. They noted that there were 132 child laboring victims with the average age of 14 and 145 perpetrators in that broad spectrum of industries. The trafficking criteria they used was exploitive labor practices, fraud, and threats of physical violence. Companies are paid billions to root out our child labor in the US. Failure is imminent. In this situation, in 2019, a federal auditor arrived at a meat packing plant in Minnesota. He was there on behalf of Walgreens to ensure that the company's house brand of beef jerky was safe and free of labor abuses. He had concluded there were no major abuses. However, in the evening and night, 150 workers showed up at the plant. Among them were migrant children who had come to the United States by themselves looking for work. Children as young as 15 were operating heavy machinery capable of amputating fingers and crushing bones. Migrant child labor in the United States is a dangerous job, one of which is roofing. Federal law prohibits children under 18 to be roofers. However, they are frequently employed. A New York Times investigation from last year found that migrant children who have been coming to the United States in record numbers are ending up in dangerous jobs, violating child labor laws. After that publication by Times, the White House announced a crackdown on companies that hire migrant children. But all along, there are signs of children at risk that the administration ignored or missed. Tyson Foods and Purdue Farms continue to be under federal investigation about whether they relied on migrant children to clean slaughterhouses. In Grand Rapids, my hometown, there is a manufacturer called Hearthside Food Solutions, which is under investigation following the Times article. It claims that it never knowingly employed underage labor in their facilities. Ephraim Baltimore said that he started working overnight in an Illinois factory when he was 14, packing products including Starburst, candies, and Oreos. Hearthside claimed they had no person of that name on their employee schedules. One of the difficulties that is embedded in this situation is that the auditors and plant inspectors do their work by appointment with the employers and always at the first shift. They do not return to inspect the factories at second shift or third shift. Yvonne Perez was killed this last summer while cleaning a Chick-fil-A supplier in Mississippi. Miguel is another employee of the Hearthside Food Solutions. What power do we have to stop these tragedies? Our power is rooted in our commitment to act. As informed citizens, are we willing to be aware of the realities of trafficking? Can we lend our time, talent, and treasure to programs and alliances preventing and protecting? Do we use our voice to lobby for policies and programs from our legislators? As consumers of goods and services, do we do fair trade purchasing? Can we boycott companies guilty of trafficking? Are we aware of our responsibility for corporate responsible investing? Currently, the Alliance to End Human Trafficking Advocacy Committee is urging its members to support two legislation: better protect asylum seekers from human trafficking, to encourage Congress to fix this vulnerability and eliminate unnecessary bureaucratic red tape by passing House Resolution 1325, the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act. The House Resolution 6145 and Senate Bill 3178 is sponsoring the Immigration Court Efficiency and Children's Court Act that would revolutionize U.S. immigration by prioritizing the safety of unaccompanied minors and enhancing protection. The Alliance has commended the Senate Judiciary Committee for the public dialogue on important issues of protecting children. The human trafficking and forced migration. The U.S. Department of State estimates that over 70% of persons trafficked in the United States are immigrants. People on the move or recently arrived are at a particular risk of exploitation by traffickers. The Alliance in collaboration with the National Advocacy Center of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, work to end human trafficking, deplore the increase of human trafficking in the United States and around the world, some of which results from unprecedented forced migration. Fair trade. Fair trade is many things. It includes conscious consumerism, fair deal, international business models, independent third-party certification, and human rights dignity. And I'm passing this back to you, Christine.
In the summer of 1990, I heard about these crazy people who called themselves fair traders. The essence of fair trade is empowerment. It's helping farmers come together and giving them the tools to solve their own problems. We launched at a time when world coffee prices were plummeting. And it enabled us to sign up coffee companies who were looking for a way to give something back. I always believed it would work. Really quickly, we started to add more products. Companies came to us. 20 years later, we're doing more than 30 different products. Quinoa and fresh fruits and vegetables and apparel and home goods and fish. And making a powerful difference in communities all over the world. One of the keys to the success of fair trade has been the rise of conscious consumerism and the emergence of a new mentality in the way we shop. What fair trade does is it creates a more transparent and traceable global supply chain. Consumers are asking for products that are consistent with our values. We want to be reassured that we did no harm. Our impact for farmers and workers around the world is now $500 million. We have reached 1.6 million families in 70 countries around the world. We set up health, education, housing, environmental stewardship. Fair trade has worked so hard for the last 20 years to create a model of business with purpose.
It really is using business as a force for good in the world. The endeavor is pure.
The companies that are doing fair trade today are the pioneers of a whole new chapter that in the future will be the norm. Lots to feel proud of. And yet, we're just getting started.
And Sister Brigid, we're right about time, so I'm just going to ask you if you could just take the next minute or two to finish up, and then we'll hand it over to Kwami.
If it lets me go. It seems to have frozen up on me. But let me say, with the last pieces that we are considering is the use of our stocks, our retirement funds. And what we are encouraged to do is to be aware of the use of our shareholder power to align our stocks and bonds, our retirement funds, with the guiding principles of human rights, which allows us to challenge corporations to note that human trafficking is a great risk to the financial, regulatory, legislative, legal, and reputational risks for the corporation and disservice to its shareholders. And the companies that are being currently challenged in this area of human rights and trafficking abuses include Amazon, Broadcom, Core Civic, General Motors, Home Depot, Kroger, Royal Caribbean, Skechers Foods, Tyson, and the like. And so we come to understand our responsibilities as consumers, as stockholders, shareholders, and the moral reality of our necessity to be involved in preventing and alleviating labor trafficking, and particularly child labor trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Brigid. And I just want to let you know that we will have time for Q&A after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Kwami, who's going to share a little bit more about his story and labor trafficking here in the United States before we learn a little bit more from Eileen on a global level. And then we will have some Q&A for our panelists, and we'll open it up to everyone. You can put your questions in our Q&A chat box, and we will wrap up here today by 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kwami. Go ahead, Kwami.
Thank you, sister, for the wonderful presentation. That you set the stage for all of us, so thank you. Yes, as I sit here and listen to you talk and give us the rundown what human trafficking is, and especially what labor trafficking is, I realize, you know, I as a country, this has been what we have, you know, labor trafficking has been part of our history for many years. And it was never really abolished. We can disagree or agree on this topic, but we have normalized labor trafficking in this country. The reason why we don't get affected by it anymore because we have normalized it. Okay, everything we use came from somewhere. Do we know where they came from? Do you know who's making them? Do we know how they got here? No, we don't. We have normalized it, so we overlook it and don't want to think about it. So the premise is that if I know where it came from, then I have to change my lifestyle. And like a sister said, we have responsibility to make changes. Do we boycott? What do we do? How do we make sure the corporations are aware of what's going on? How do we make sure that we are not the big consumer? Because you think about it, the U.S. is the big consumer of human trafficking of all, of sex and labor. We are the biggest consumer. We are number one consumer of all type of trafficking. And so we have a lot to do in this field. As we all sit here today, listen to sister talk and learn about trafficking, labor trafficking, we have a lot to do. We, as a whole, we have a lot to do. So I encourage you to dig into those companies that sister lists there. You know where your money is going. We need to know where our money is going. So I just want to start with to say that that's what we are facing right now. That's our problem in our country right now, is that we are not wanting to see this crime because then we have to change our lifestyle. As a child that came to this country from a different country, as a 7 years old who was brought here to labor, child labor. I was only 7 when I came here. And I was working and no one noticed that. That's why? Because it's so normalized. We don't think about it. We have forgotten that this country is built on labor. People who have worked hard were abused to build this country. and we just forgot it doesn't exist anymore. It still does. And that's what I was doing. I was working, I was trafficked here, I was smuggled into this country, and I worked, and I was full-time student as well as a child. And no one seemed to care that this was happening to me. Why? Why should they care? It's not their kids. It's not happening in their house. It's not happening in their neighborhood. So why should somebody care? But that's just the mentality that we don't need to have. That's what is hurting this movement. We all need to care. We need to care about this crime. We have to care. As I was listening to your sister, you were talking about cobalt. Our government, back in 2023, Secretary of State Blinken, he signed an MOU with Congo and Zambia to mine cobalt. This is on the State Department. Look it up. Are we gonna sit here and tell me that we don't know about these things? Do you know where your electric vehicles come from? Do you know where the batteries are coming from? They are coming from kids that are mining in dangerous spots, and our government is okay with that. Our government is okay with that. We signed an MOU with a country that are using their own kids to mine cobalt out of the ground, a dangerous elements. Yes, your electric vehicle, that's where they are coming from kids as young as 7, 5, are going down there, are digging up, and so yeah, we can have a luxurious life in this country. We need to rethink our strategy when it comes to human trafficking. Slavery is still happening, people. We need to fight against that. We need to know who we are supporting, where our monies are going. If the government is willing to let kids work in mining, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know what's going to happen next. It's very scary thoughts. There are governments okay with stuff like this. It's scary thoughts. There are kids in this country are working if we don't care. And then when we find out kids are working, we kind of just forget about it. We write a report about it and then we forgot that it exists. This evil needs to stop. We need to do better. We need to fight this crime. We need to do a lot more. And it's tough for our government. We need to make sure they are not signing MOU with countries that are using their kids to dig up cobalt. We need to know where our coffees are coming from. These stories are right here. We are the consumer of everything that's coming from other countries. We are the consumer of it. So I beg you to rethink about where your money is going, what you are buying, what you are doing with your money, what company you are buying from. Do your research, do your due diligence, and figure it out.
So Kwami, if we can move to some domestic labor trafficking here before we move on to Eileen, who will talk a little bit more about the global aspects. So we know that labor trafficking happens not only globally, but also locally here in many of the different industries, whether it's agriculture or the dairy industry, the meat packing industries, and so forth. One that people don't often hear about, and it's very hard to detect, is domestic labor trafficking and domestic servitude. So I know in your case, you were a survivor of domestic labor trafficking.
That's correct.
And for many people, it's hard to detect. You fortunately were able to go to school in your situation, even though you were labor trafficked at the same time. Can you share with us briefly, just like a minute or two, how was your situation detected, and what do you recommend? What are some of the signs to look for?
Yeah, thank you for that question. No, we can agree that using a child to make money is wrong. And that's exactly what my trafficker did. There were 4 of us that he brought to this country, and we basically became his own personal slave. And we worked for him day in, day out while we were going to school at the same time. You know, I was doing landscaping for him. I was cooking for him, his friends. Anything he can contract me to, he will do it. He was contracting me to his friends, his neighbors, anyone that asked him for work, we would do the work for him. And if the work is not done properly, we are punished. If that by we have food, or by punishment, by by beating, you name it all. Not only was I trafficked, I was also abused by this man as a child. The only reason why I'm here today is because the science that came out of that lifestyle is that I became very withdrawn from my students in my classroom. I didn't have any friends. I have scar tissue. I have bruises on my arms. I was withdrawn. I was malnourished. It's all the signs that my teacher saw in me. That's how she was able to help me. If it was for the fact that I was in school system and she cares about me, I wouldn't be here today. I would still be with my trafficker, working for him, and no one will know. That is how this crime works. It's that hidden in plain sight because we have normalized it in this country.
Thank you so much, Kwami. And I think it's just so important to hear that as teachers, as people in the community, by taking an interest in learning what are the signs to look for, that we can play a role in ending child trafficking as well here in the United States. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Eileen. And Eileen will talk a little bit more about this issue and her experience on a global level. Go ahead, Eileen.
Well, thank you, Christine, and the Alliance for Ending Human Trafficking for having me. Thank you, Sister Brigid, for sharing all the stats and the important signs for watching out for. And Kwami, my fellow brother, thank you for your courage for sharing your story. My journey started from when I was escaping from my intimate partner, who inflicted a traumatic brain injury on me. I realized that I had to escape or I would not survive. My escape led me to homelessness, a state of constant vulnerability. With my family 8,000 miles away in China and no friends to turn to, I was left to sleep on strangers' couches and in the overcrowded shelters, often facing rejection due to the severe shortage of shelter spaces. This lack of stability made me an easy target for further exploitation. Men who initially offered to help me turned into abusers and traffickers, using my situation to force me into marriage and coerce me into domestic servitude and sex trafficking, a form of debt bondage. This relentless violence and exploitation left me feeling helpless and alone. Yet, in the midst of this darkness, God sent me my brothers and sisters from church who rescued me and provided me with a place to stay. If it weren't for them, I often wonder where I would be today. Would I still be here today? The root cause of my situation was homelessness, exacerbated by a critical shortage of human trafficking shelters nationwide. And this lack of safe space left me and countless other vulnerable to traffickers. To address this crisis, I founded Hope Picks Global with a mission to build shelters across the United States and eventually around the world. Our goal is to provide not just a safe haven, for survivors, but also offering them the services such as trauma recovery, job skills training, and a social enterprise to help them become financially independent, being able to heal and rebuild their lives. It is also worthwhile to mention that despite that I hold 3 degrees, I couldn't escape the hands of traffickers. Women in my culture were taught to be obedient, and I didn't know what trafficking was. Therefore, today I train law enforcement and victim service providers on improving the effectiveness of victim identification. This year, I had the honor of speaking at the UN commemorating the 10th anniversary of UNODC's World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And as Christine mentioned, this year's theme is Leaving No Child Behind. And today, I will address this growing pandemic of child and labor trafficking globally. This issue, which crosses borders and cultures, exploits the most vulnerable amongst us. It is crucial that we understand the gravity of this situation, and more importantly, what we can do to prevent it. So I'm going to share some of the stats and some of the stories around the world. And as a Global Goals Ambassador, I will also be discussing the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as some international initiatives and treaties. International labor trafficking affects countless children and young people around the world. In France, young girls, often from marginalized communities, are forced into criminal activities like stealing in the Paris metro. Under threats of violence, these children are coerced into meeting daily quotas, and if they fail, they are often subject to brutal punishment such as cigarette burns and other physical or even sexual abuse. In Eastern Europe, particularly in Moldova and Ukraine, children are trafficked for labor in agriculture, often working under harsh and unsafe conditions. In Bosnia, Roma girls are particularly vulnerable, who were coerced into begging, theft, domestic servitude, and prostitution. This exploitation is often facilitated by dowry system in the Roma societies, which can lead to debt bondage and lifelong servitude. In Southeast Asia, people are forced to work in inhumane conditions to commit illegal activities such as online scams. In Japan, 400,000 migrant workers experience restricted freedom of movement, poor living conditions, wage garnishing, and other indicators of labor trafficking. Young girls are exploited in maid cafes and on the street to lure tourists to buy sex, and sometimes even acting as intermediaries to recruit victims for sexual services. China, too, has witnessed horrifying incidents of boys and women being kidnapped and sold for marriage or domestic servitude. Held in captivity, one woman was chained on her neck. Cultural stigmas such as male preferences and societal honor can further entrench these issues. In Africa, agriculture accounts for 85% of all child labor and for 61.4 million children in absolute terms. Child labor in agriculture relates to primarily to substances and commercial farming and livestock holding, and it is often hazardous and its nature in the circumstances it is carried out. And in Latin America, the worst forms of labor trafficking are slavery, debt bondage, prostitution, pornography, forced recruitment of children for use in armed conflicts, use of children in drug trafficking, and other illicit activities, and the list goes on. Due to conflicts such as the Ukrainian war, women and children are forced to leave their homes and even their country, putting them in vulnerable situations for both domestic servitude and sex trafficking. Smuggled migrants are also vulnerable to trafficking. These examples demonstrate the widespread and devastating nature of child and labor trafficking. This global crisis is fueled by organized crime, corruption, and the greed of traffickers. The root causes of trafficking are complex and interconnected. Poverty, homelessness, and a lack of job skills make children and young people particularly vulnerable to exploitation. They can be both labor and sex trafficking victims, or one can lead to another. Additionally, inadequate social protection system, lack of training, and insufficient job opportunities leave many young people with few options to legitimate employment. These challenges are compounded by a lack of awareness and understanding among the general public, as well as the gaps in legal frameworks and institutional mechanisms. Without a coordinated and comprehensive response, trafficking will continue to thrive, perpetuating cycles of abuse and exploitation. Here are some of the examples of the global initiatives and the international treaties that are being worked on and has been created. The 2030 Agenda, as you know, the Sustainable Development Goals are set for the 2030 Agenda. They're set for comprehensive blueprint for achieving a better and more sustainable future for all, including a commitment to end human trafficking and exploitation. CEDAW Committee General Recommendation number 38 emphasizes the need to reduce the demand and foster exploitation, the demand that fosters exploitation, particularly of women and girls, through prevention measures and legal framework. The UN Special Report on Trafficking highlights that child marriage can constitute a form of trafficking where it involves the transfer of control of a person, often under coercive circumstances, for exploitation. The UN Special Rapporteur June report on violence against women and girls underscores the increasing use of technology in trafficking, highlighting the need for comprehensive strategies to address digital and cyber trafficking of women and girls. As we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, I wanted to emphasize SDG 16.2 and 5.2 that calls for the ending of violence and exploitation with a specific focus on trafficking in women and girls, aligning with CEDAW Article 6, which mandates the measures to suppress all forms of trafficking. And last year, TSW UN Women Commission on the Status of Women advocates eliminating all forms of trafficking in girls, emphasizing the need for robust legal framework, international cooperation, and comprehensive support services for the survivors. At the CSW 68 in this year, the focus was to tackle poverty. CSW 69, which is coming up next year, we will be focusing on the Beijing Declaration plus 30, and work are being done as we speak. Some of the recommendations I would like to address. Addressing child and labor trafficking requires a multifaceted approach that includes prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. Survivor-centered approach empowers survivors by ensuring they are at the front and center of decision-making, listening to survivor voices, utilizing survivor leader expertise, and integrate survivor-informed policies and programs. Supply chain review mechanism. Companies and consumers should advocate for and support supply chain review mechanism to prevent the exploitation and child labor trafficking. Demand disruption. Efforts must be made to disrupt the demand for trafficked labor. This includes raising awareness and educating consumers about the impact of their choices. As we observe the World Day Against Trafficking in persons, let us commit to taking actions, whether through raising awareness, advocating for policy changes, or supporting survivors. Each of us has a role to play in preventing trafficking and protecting the vulnerable. Together, we can work together towards a world where every child is safe and free from exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. We appreciate that. So before I open it up to the general and you public, you can put your Q&A, your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll review those. I do have while people are doing that, I do have a few questions myself. So Eileen just gave a rundown of some of the stuff that we could do to address trafficking right here globally and locally. Is there anything else, Kwami? I know you may have to head out in a minute. Is there anything you recommend also for addressing labor trafficking, either here locally or abroad, that we can do to make a difference?
I think Lynn really hit the point on there. You know, she lists out everything that we as a community, as this movement continue to, you know, we need to keep in mind we are fighting for, and that we are fighting for human, you know, the human life, and its life, you know, its life matter. And so we just need to know, keep that in mind, knowing that we are all God's children, and that we are not meant to be a prophet for anyone. We are not a prophet. We are not somebody's prophet. And so that itself should give us enough to think about. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And what would you say to people who have become complacent because of this magnitude of this problem? How do we inspire people where they feel like it might be so far away, or they feel like, well, I'm one person, what can I do to make a difference? What can I do with just my one, you know, purchasing choice? What would you say to people who have become complacent on this issue? Anyone, that's for
I'll
anyone.
start. I have a sort of a favorite parable of the last snowflake. Snowflake has no weight, but in the winter, tree branches break because of snowflakes. One snowflake will not do it. The combined work of all of them together. So we are obligated to be the last snowflake that will tear down the oppressive structures that we work with. So if we think that, you know, if I buy a Hershey bar, it's not going to change the world. But if all of us stop buying a Hershey bar and let Hershey know that we are not, we will change the world. So that not to be overwhelmed by the smallness of our actions with a problem that seems so great, but to be persistent and committed and being willing to make the effort to find what are the alternatives.
Thank you so much, Sister Brigid. And I would just like to add on that, to share an example of where that has made a difference. And if you look at the tuna industry, if you look on every single can of tuna fish, and there's slavery in the seafood industry as well. You can check out our YouTube channel. We have a whole webinar on slavery in our seafood. But on every single can of tuna fish, there's a dolphin safe label on that can of tuna fish. And why is that? Because people saw that dolphins were being slaughtered and they were outraged, right? And so they started boycotting the tuna fish industry. And then the government got involved to start regulating that labeling, because then tuna fish cans and companies started labeling dolphin safe. So then the government got involved and they started monitoring that. And now you look on every single can of tuna fish. So if we can have dolphin safe tuna, why can't we have slave-free seafood? Why can't we have all of our products that are slave-free? So I just like to throw in that example. And now I do see that we have a number of questions in our chat box. So I will go ahead and read some of those. This was a great one by Tony. He would like some ideas on what exactly parishes and dioceses can do in a systematic, hands-on way to help end human trafficking, labor rights abuses, and child labor. I open up to anyone who wants to take that
You
up.
we have talked in our education committee about the Lenten fish dinners. And how do we invite the Knights of Columbus to be aware of the labor trafficking in that industry and to encourage them to buy their fish for their fish fries from reputable companies? I mean, it's a very practical piece at a parish level. A whole lot of parishes have that reality of Lenten fish fries. Again, it's a snowflake effort.
Yeah, no, sister, you're right about that. I didn't think of that at all, but something that I personally have, taken upon myself to do in my diocese. I'm from the Diocese of Cleveland, and something that we are promoting or starting to do right now is that we are starting a task force in the Diocese of Cleveland. I don't think dioceses have that yet, but we be the first to. The goal is to start implementing an educational opportunity for schools and parishes and staffs to be aware of the crime that's going on and unnoticed, because the church needs to get involved, because not everything's out there is, it's the church is very kind of quiet on things. And so as a Catholic myself, I have kids. I want to protect my kids, and I want my kids to go to school and feel safe. And so we need to do more educational things in the school system and get the parishes involved. So that's what is going on in my right now. That's what we are working on. That I'm part of that. I'm working to make sure these come to fruition. So, it's small things, the snowflake idea. I like the snowflake analogy. Really cool. So we can make difference.
When I was a pastoral associate, a group of the justice community within the parish challenged me to say that as a parish, we were very generous contributing to whoever was asking us, but we had no idea of why the need was there. And so that group of parishioners commissioned me to start doing an education program for the whole parish as to why the needs exist.
That is so
Great.
well said, Sister Brigid and Christine and Kwami. I would like to point out that, there's also the debt bondage, as well as people who are kept in captivity for committing illicit activities. So to that extent, currently, something that you can get hands-on right away is the TSRA, the Trafficking Survivor Relief Act, which we're advocating. That act will help expunge the criminal records to allow survivors to be able to work and be financially independent and prevent re-victimization. So I strongly encourage, we're working in the background, and hopefully the campaign will come out soon. You can, find on my social media, Eileen.official, and I will be posting as soon as they become available. Another thing I would like to, recommend, and I see that AEHT is already including Kwami and many of the survivors on the council, but, with the parishes, include survivors and be survivor inclusive, be survivor informed in every step of the way when it comes to protection of victims and prevention of this crime. And last but not least, going back to, I love the tuna can, the signage on the tuna cans. I actually prepared some of those chocolates. So like, when you go to the store, really look out for those signs. You can see like the fair trade signs, and we can all play, just like Sister Brigid said. We have this snowflake effect. Every action, no matter how small, it counts, and it all contribute to combating human trafficking. And as I like to say, that we are planting the seeds and we are watering the seeds. And even though we may not, and I hope we will, see the seed blossom, but we have to start somewhere, and start with you, and start today.
Thank you. And I'd like to just add on to what Sister Brigid said, that there is a labeling for Lent campaign that is done every year with the USCCB. And that's always done around, obviously Lent season because of all the seafood that is consumed. So that's something to look into, that you could get your parish involved. Something else that we did here in the Diocese of Orlando was we had a fair trade and labor trafficking event. So we had some speakers come and share about the issue. We also had fair trade vendors. You could start as something as simply as offering fair trade coffee after Mass. A lot of churches have coffee and donuts, so making those little choices and educating people and inviting a speaker to come and talk to your group, or having film viewing, or even having them, watch their webinar on slavery in the seafood industry before Lent, and contacting those companies that they're buying those seafood from, whether it's, Costco or Cisco and so forth. So I want to move on to the next question because we only have a few minutes left. One of the questions was that what are the resources available? You can go on our website, the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. We have a lot of information available on there. You can sign up for our action alerts if you're interested in signing petitions. You can also go under our survivor services. We have a list of companies of survivor made products and fair trade products, and how you can support those companies. And the other question I believe I saw was, is there a list of companies that we should boycott or look out for? And there's so many where the supply chain is tainted along some point of the way. It's such a huge, complicated issue. But I would say, like David and Goliath, right? This is such a huge issue that it seems hard to tackle and bring down. But if you take 5 products and change the way you purchase those products, whether it's contacting the companies, looking at who offers fair trade products, whether it's chocolate or coffee, looking at clothing supply stores and see where there's clothing supplies from. Those are just some suggestions. And then I want to lead off with this last question. Do human trafficking lawmakers and labor lawmakers work together? Eileen, do you have an answer for that? Or Kwami, do you know anything related to that?
This is a very comprehensive issue for sure. Like, for instance, we talk about in different states, for instance, internationally, whether in the United States, forced marriage is not a form of human trafficking. And same, in the similar context, human trafficking lawmakers as well as labor trafficking lawmakers oftentimes might not intersect. But we must, as I mentioned earlier, that we must collectively work together so that we do not reinvent the wheel. We must work on the high level so that we can work on the state level and use the same wheel that we have invented and work together on that.
Okay, and we are out of time, but I want to give you guys just 30 seconds. One takeaway that you think people can use to make a difference with this issue, and we'll start with Sister Brigid.
The work that I have been doing over the last umpteen years has been with communities and gathering like-minded persons together to help educate the larger community, to give working possibilities such as the boycotts or the fair trade, and making those behaviors easy to use.
Great. And Kwami.
Yeah, thank you. I would just want to say, regardless of your political belief, we are all God's children, and we have obligation to protect each other's and to look out for each other's. So be the different in your community. Do what you can to make sure that you are aware and aware of your surroundings, and get involved, and make sure you are fighting a good fight. So thank you.
And Eileen.
Well said, Kwame. I was going to say something similar as well. You know, no matter how small the part that you will play your part, whether it is to advocate for policy, whether it is to raise the awareness for your community or for your own children's safety and prevention, or donate if you're able to donate money to whether it's your local parish nonprofit organizations, whether it's to shelters or to the survivor initiatives. And last but not least, volunteer. Volunteer your skills. If you're a doctor, support them by providing maybe free healthcare. If you're a lawyer, maybe provide free legal aid. So just do what you can, and everyone can play a part.
Thank you all so much for your insights and expertise. I know we didn't get to all the questions, and there were some questions that I think were a little bit outside the scope, but we are happy to answer any of your questions that you have. You can email info@alliance-to-end-human-trafficking.org. You can visit our website, alliance-to-end-human-trafficking.org. We have our webinars recorded on our YouTube channel, so I suggest that you check some of those out and learn more about this issue. And we will be sending out this recording as well as a follow-up survey. We would love to have your feedback. And if you have any other questions, like I said, please feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to provide as many answers and resources as we can. Have a great day, and thank you for your time. And we really appreciate you taking this interest in helping end labor trafficking and human trafficking.